All right, let's jump right in. Today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most notorious tracks in hip-hop history, Eminem's Antichrist, dropped back in '05. This one's not just another diss track, though. It's more like a lyrical grenade that went off, and the shockwaves are still being felt today.
Yeah, no doubt. Eminem was already known for pushing the envelope. But
Yeah.
Antichrist, that one crossed a line for a lot of people. To really grasp the impact, though, you got to understand where hip-hop was at back then.
Okay, so take us back to 2005. What was the scene like?
Imagine this. The mixtape scene was blowing up. Independent artists were coming out of the woodwork, challenging the establishment, and every rapper wanted to be on top.
Yeah.
So it was really competitive time. Rapid evolution, too, both in the sounds and the lyrics themselves.
And into the scene walks Eminem, already a global icon, right? How did that affect how people took Antichrist?
Well, Eminem's position was unique. He wasn't just another competitor. He was the guy to beat. The benchmark. Everyone was gunning for him. So when Antichrist dropped, it wasn't just another diss track. It was a statement from the king of the hill. And people, they had to pay attention.
So let's get into the song itself. What exactly makes it so shocking?
It's not just one thing. It's this whole cocktail of factors. Lyrically, Eminem goes straight for the jugular, aiming at specific people. Using some seriously graphic language and imagery, he doesn't hold anything back, calling out names, airing out his grievances. And the viciousness of it all, it's kind of hard to stomach, honestly.
Yeah, when you listen back to it, it's definitely not just playful banter. This is straight up aggression, fueled by some real raw emotion.
Right, that rawness is unsettling. But it's also what makes it so captivating, Eminem isn't just rapping here. He's exposing all this inner turmoil, his rage, his insecurities. And he's doing it in a way that's both vulnerable and terrifying. And to pull that off on a track that's technically brilliant, well, that's what sets Antichrist apart.
Let's break down that technical brilliance for a sec. We know Eminem is a master of wordplay, but give us some specifics. What makes these lyrics so noteworthy?
Well, one thing that stands out is the way he uses internal rhymes and these really complex rhyme schemes. He'll stack multiple rhymes within a single line, creating this dense layered effect. It's like he's doing verbal gymnastics, right? Incredibly impressive from a purely technical standpoint.
And beyond the technical skill, you've got the content itself. This track goes deep, man. You hear anger, sure, but there's also these echoes of mental health struggles, a critique of the whole industry, this deep sense of isolation. It's heavy stuff.
It's almost like he's using the diss track format to explore something much bigger than that, He's not just attacking others, he's dissecting himself too. And that's where it gets really unsettling for some people. You like watching someone unravel publicly, and you're just not sure where it's all going to end up.
And that public unraveling, that's what ignited so much debate, right?
Exactly. Some people praise the raw honesty, the vulnerability, the way he just ripped apart this polished image of a superstar, right? Others, they felt like it was exploitative, like a cry for attention disguised as art. And then the people he was attacking, they had their own reactions too, which only added fuel to the fire.
So you've got this explosive track, this volatile hip-hop scene, and Eminem's right in the middle of it all. How did people actually react when Antichrist dropped?
It was a total firestorm. Critics were divided. Fans read each other's throats. And the media, well, they had a field day with it. This wasn't just a song, it was a cultural event, and everyone had something to say about it.
Okay, so let's dive into those opinions. What were some of the specific reactions to Antichrist, both the good and the bad?
On one hand, you had people praising the sheer audacity of the track, the lyrical skill, the raw emotion, They saw it as Eminem getting back to his roots. The unfiltered rebel who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. They loved how he went after hypocrisy, both within the industry and in society as a whole.
And I bet that resonated with a lot of fans who were feeling that same disillusionment.
Oh, absolutely. Antichrist became an anthem for people who felt marginalized, misunderstood, angry at the world. It gave voice to their frustrations, their anxieties, their anger. And that kind of validation is powerful. But there's another side to this.
Right. With a track this intense, there's got to be another side. What were the criticisms?
A lot of people felt like he went too far. The graphic language, the personal attacks, the pure aggression of it all, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Some argued that it crossed the line into hate speech.
Yeah.
That it glorified violence and misogyny.
And those accusations weren't exactly new for Eminem, were they?
Nope. His career has been pretty much defined by controversy right from the start. But Antichrist seemed to take those concerns and crank them up to 11. It sparked this whole debate about an artist's responsibility, especially those with a massive platform like his.
So you've got this clash of perspectives, artistic expression versus the potential for harm, freedom of speech versus the impact of words. And right in the middle of it all is Antichrist, forcing us to confront some really complex issues.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes this track so fascinating. Even after all these years, it's like a time capsule of this very specific moment in hip-hop history. And it keeps raising questions that we're still wrestling with today.
And before we unpack those questions further, let's take a closer look at the man behind the music. We've talked about Eminem, the rapper, Eminem, the provocateur, but what about Marshall Mathers, the human being at the heart of it all?
It's easy to forget sometimes, behind the persona, behind the lyrics, there's an actual person in there, right?
Yeah.
Dealing with real emotions. And with Antichrist, more so than a lot of his other tracks, I think you really get a glimpse into Marshall Mathers' inner world.
Yeah, you really feel that vulnerability, that rawness poking through the aggression. It's like he's trying to exercise some demons right there on the track.
And that's where the whole Antichrist metaphor comes in. It's not just shock value, right? It actually reflects this internal struggle he's got going on, this feeling of being at odds with himself, and with the whole world.
So how does that struggle, that internal conflict, how does it actually play out in the song? Give us some specifics.
Well, there's this one verse where he's talking about feeling trapped by fame, like he sold his soul to get to the top. And now he's paying the price. He even compares himself to that girl from The Exorcist, like possessed by this dark force.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy image. And it kind of speaks to that feeling of being consumed by something bigger than yourself, right? Whether it's fame, addiction, or those demons we were talking about.
Exactly, and it ties back to the whole critique of the music industry we were discussing earlier. It's not just about attacking individuals, it's about the whole system, the way it chews people up and spits them out.
And in a sense, he's a product of that system, right? Even while he's fighting against it. It's this strange paradox, this cycle of creation and destruction, and he's stuck in the middle.
And Antichrist almost becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. You know what I mean? By embodying this destructive persona, he just pushes people away, further isolates himself. It's a vicious cycle, both personally and artistically.
So we've covered the dark side, the aggression, the vulnerability, but Eminem is also incredibly clever.
Right.
A master of weaving all these hidden meanings into his music. What are some of the Easter eggs, as they call them, that we can find in Antichrist?
Oh, there are tons. Like there's one line where he mentions this really specific candy bar. Seems totally random, right? But if you look into his interviews, you'll find out this candy was a big deal to him when he was a kid, Represents his time of innocence, before the fame, before all the chaos.
It's like a secret message, a little nod to those who are really paying attention. And it adds this whole other layer to the song, right? A glimpse into his past that most people will probably miss.
Exactly. And there are others too. Like little references to his past relationships, his struggles with addiction, even inside jokes with the people he collaborates with. It's like a treasure hunt for the die-hard fans. Adds to the whole tapestry of the track,
It also shows that blurred line between his real life and the persona he creates on stage. He's constantly messing with our heads, right? Leaving us to wonder where Marshall Mathers ends and Slim Shady begins.
And that's part of what makes him so brilliant, right? That ability to keep us guessing, to flip our expectations on their head. He's not just a rapper, he's a performance artist. And Antichrist is a perfect example of that.
Okay, so we've dissected Antichrist from a few different angles. Now let's zoom out a little. How does this track fit into that bigger tradition of diss tracks in hip-hop?
Diss tracks are more than just people insulting each other on a beat. You know what I mean? They're storytelling, a way to settle scores, build up your reputation, even address social or political stuff. And they've got a long history in hip-hop, going all the way back to the beginning.
And Antichrist definitely taps into that, right? It's got that raw, confrontational vibe that we associate with the classic diss tracks.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But it takes it a step further, too. Instead of just attacking his rivals, Eminem uses the format to kind of dig into his own head, to explore those internal conflicts, his relationship with fame, where he fits in the grand scheme of things. It's a lot more introspective, almost philosophical in a way.
So while it shares some elements with those old school battle raps, it's also pushing the genre forward, right? Using it as a vehicle for something more personal, more emotionally complex.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of why Antichrist still resonates with people today. Even those who aren't super into hip-hop. It's not just about who's the best rapper. It's about something deeper, something we can all relate to, like that search for identity, the pressure to succeed, the battle with our own demons.
And it's all wrapped up in a track that's super aggressive, sonically, lyrically dense, and emotionally charged. It's powerful stuff, man. Hard to shake off even after the song's over.
And that's a sign of truly great art, right? It sticks with you, makes you think, forces you to face those uncomfortable truths. about yourself, about the world. And that's something Antichrist definitely does.
Right, so we've talked about the lyrics, the historical context, the impacts. What about the legacy of Antichrist? How has it affected Eminem's career and the whole hip-hop landscape, for that matter?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is, well, complicated, right? On one hand, Antichrist kind of cemented Eminem's image as the ultimate provocateur, the guy who just refuses to shut up, no matter how controversial his message might be.
It kind of doubled down on that bad boy image, right? The idea that he was always going to push the envelope further than anyone else, even if it meant losing some fans along the way.
Yeah, and that image has followed him ever since. It's made him a target for criticism, sure, but it's also earned him this fiercely loyal fan base. You know, people who admire his honesty and his refusal to compromise.
But it also raises questions, right, about where you draw the line with artistic expression. When does provocation turn into something harmful? When does pushing boundaries cross over into something dangerous?
Those are questions we're still asking ourselves today. Not just in hip-hop, but in all forms of art. And Antichrist is this potent example of how blurry those lines can get, you know? How art can be both brilliant and problematic, insightful and potentially damaging at the same time.
A complex legacy, for sure. One that keeps the debate going, even all these years later.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that speaks volumes about the power of Antichrist, you know?
Yeah.
It's not a song you can easily dismiss or forget. It sticks with you.
Yeah.
Challenges you. Makes you confront those uncomfortable truths about art, identity, the human experience.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Antichrist, what's the one thing you want our listeners to think about as they go back and listen to this track or explore more of Eminem's work?
I think the most important thing to remember is Antichrist is more than just a song. You know, it's a conversation starter. It gets people talking about artistic freedom, mental health, the music industry, the role art plays in society. And those are conversations we really need to be having, especially these days.
So don't just listen to the music, engage with it. Ask the tough questions. Challenge what you think you know. And most importantly, keep that conversation going.
Because that's how we learn, right? That's how we grow. That's how we make sense of the world around us, which is always changing.
And speaking of change, it's kind of wild to think about how Antichrist fits into Eminem's overall body of work, you know? We've seen him experiment with different styles, tackle all sorts of themes. Where would you say this track falls on that spectrum?
It's definitely a pivotal moment, I'd say, a turning point. Before Antichrist, he was mostly known for shock value, a sense of humor, those battle raps. But with this track, he's showing us something new, right? A new level of introspection, this willingness to be vulnerable, to really grapple with some heavy stuff.
It's like he's peeling back the layers, letting us see a little bit of the man behind the curtain.
Exactly. And you see that shift continue in his later work, too. He doesn't shy away from the darkness, personal struggles, all that. But he also starts exploring themes of redemption, growth, even forgiveness.
So Antichrist is almost like a bridge, then, between the early, more outrageous Eminem and the later, more introspective artist he becomes.
Yeah, I like that. It's this raw, unfiltered snapshot of where he was at, mentally and emotionally at that time. But it also hints at where he's headed, artistically.
And that evolution, that willingness to push boundaries, both musically and thematically, it's had a massive impact on hip-hop, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Eminem's influence is undeniable. He inspired a whole generation of rappers to step up their game, you know, to be more lyrical, more experimental, to use their platform to talk about real issues, both personal and societal.
And he proved that hip-hop could be more than just party anthems and braggadocio, right? That it could be a space for vulnerability, for introspection, for exploring what it means to be human.
And that's a powerful legacy to leave behind, you know. He didn't just change the rules of the game, he changed the whole game itself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Antichrist, what's the one question you'd like our listeners to ponder as they revisit this track or dive deeper into Eminem's discography?
That's a good one. I think the most interesting question is this. How would we view Eminem's career differently? If Antichrist had never been released, would he still be considered a legend, a provocateur, a voice of his generation? Or would we be talking about him in a completely different way?
It's a really interesting thought experiment, and it just goes to show you how much power a single track can have, right? To shape an artist's career and leave its mark on the culture.
For sure. It reminds us that music isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror, reflecting our times, our struggles, our hopes, and our fears. And when we engage with music on a deeper level, asking questions, challenging assumptions, well, we can learn a lot about ourselves and the world we live in.
So to all our listeners out there, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep the conversation going. Because as Antichrist so powerfully demonstrates, music has the power to challenge, to provoke, to inspire, and ultimately to bring us together on a much deeper level. It's wild to think about how Antichrist fits into his whole discography. We've seen him play with different personas, experiment with sounds, tackle a ton of different themes. Where would you say this track lands in all of that?
It's a big one, for sure. A turning point, I think. Before Antichrist, he was known for the shock value, the humor, the battle rap stuff.
Yeah.
But this one, it shows a different side, right? A deeper level of introspection, this willingness to get vulnerable and really dig into those complex issues.
It's like he's peeling back the curtain a little, letting us peek behind the mask.
Yeah, exactly. And you see that continue in his later work, too. He doesn't shy away from the dark stuff, the struggles he's been through. But there's also this exploration of redemption, growth, even forgiveness.
So maybe Antichrist is like a bridge, then, between the early Eminem, the one who was all about pushing buttons, and the more mature, more introspective artist he becomes later on.
Yeah, I like that. It's a raw snapshot of where his head was at during that time.
Yeah.
But it also kind of foreshadows where he's going,
Yes.
artistically speaking.
And that evolution, that willingness to push boundaries, musically and thematically, it's had a huge impact on hip-hop as a whole, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Eminem's influence is undeniable.
Yeah.
He inspired a whole generation of rappers to raise the bar. You know what I mean? To be more lyrical, more experimental, and to use their platform to talk about real things that matter, both personally and in the bigger picture.
And he showed that hip-hop could be more than just bragging and party anthems, right? That it could be a place for vulnerability, for introspection, for exploring the depth of human experience.
Yeah, and that's a powerful legacy to leave behind. He didn't just change the game. He kind of redefined what the game even was.
So before we wrap this up, what's one question you'd like our listeners to think about as they go back and listen to Antichrist or explore more of Eminem's music?
Let's see. I think the most interesting question to consider is, how would we view Eminem's career? If Antichrist had never been released, would he still have that legendary status? Would he still be seen as a provocateur, the voice of his generation? Or would we be talking about him in a completely different light?
That's a trip, man. A real mind bender. It shows you how much one song can change things, shape an artist's career and leave a lasting impact on the culture.
Absolutely.
Right.
It reminds us that music is more than just sounds, It's a reflection of who we are, our struggles, our hopes, our fears. And when we dig a little deeper, ask questions, challenge what we think we know, we can gain a whole new understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So to everyone listening, keep digging, keep exploring, and keep talking about this stuff. Because as Antichrist so clearly shows us, music has the power to challenge us, provoke us, inspire us, and ultimately to bring us together on a much deeper level.